What should you eat on your period? Are there any foods that you should be eating particularly or that you should be avoiding? Approximately 1/4 of the population has to deal with periods every month, and yet there are not a lot of information on the subject. Things are starting to change, thankfully, but I still thought I would add my contribution by telling you what your nutrition should look like during your period. Also, I've been getting a lot of questions on which foods you should eat during your menstrual cycle and during different phases of the cycle, and also how to deal with period cravings and things like that. And I'm going to address all of that in this video. So before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about the menstrual cycle. So what is the menstrual cycle? The menstrual cycle just basically describes the sequence of events that prepares your body for a pregnancy or like a possible pregnancy each month. And it lasts about 28 days and it has 3 phases. So the first phase is the follicular phase, which marks the first day of your period. And so during your period, basically your uterus lining that was there to prepare for the possible pregnancy is shedding, and that is what is causing the blood. During this phase, your estrogen and progesterone levels will be very low, and also you will probably be losing iron from losing the blood. So all of these things will contribute to you feeling tired, fatigued, weak. Around 2 weeks into the cycle is the ovulation phase, and during this phase your ovaries will release a mature egg, and during this phase your estrogen will rise as well as other hormones like FSH and LH. They will also rise, and this will make you feel better and more energized. And then a few days later you'll enter the luteal phase, where your progesterone levels will rise and then rapidly fall if the egg isn't fertilized and doesn't implant. So your hormone high will also start to decline with like the hormones that we talked previously. Your estrogen will decline, LH and FSH also declining, and so that's when you will typically not feel that good. You will typically have mood swings and you will experience premenstrual syndrome. You may have symptoms like headaches, cramps, mood swings, food cravings, things like that. So like you can see, your menstrual cycle involves a lot of hormones, and that can definitely affect the way you eat. So that's what we're going to focus on, and I'm going to focus more on the first few days of the cycle, so your period, and then the last few days of the cycle, so where you typically experience PMS. Foods to eat during your period. Throughout your entire menstrual cycle, I would suggest that you stick to eating healthy, balanced meals, mainly whole foods. Eating iron-rich foods is important on your period because you're losing a lot of blood, so a lot of red blood cells that contain iron, and for some people, in some cases, that can lead to iron deficiency. So to prevent that, you can eat iron-rich foods. Some really good iron-rich foods include oysters, mussels, spinach, beans, lentils, chickpeas, tofu, dark chocolate. You can also find a lot in like red meat and like liver meats, organ meats, things like that, but they aren't ideal to eat on your period and not the healthiest thing in general. So stick to the foods I mentioned and make sure to pair them with vitamin C rich foods as well. That will help boost the iron absorption. And if you want to know more about iron or iron rich foods, check out the video I made about that right here or in the description. Omega-3 rich foods. Omega-3 rich foods can really help reduce period pains, so I definitely recommend you eat more of them. I haven't said this I think yet, but of course my sources will be in the description, and depending on when you see this video, they will be either listed as sources or in a blog post that will be in my description. Fatty fish, algae, flax and chia seeds, as well as nuts, can be a good source of omega-3s. And if you feel like you're not getting enough, then you can try supplementing. Maybe talk to your doctor or nutritionist to see what supplements you can take. Probiotic rich foods are also very important to eat during your period. They can help keep your gut microbiome healthy and prevent vaginal infections that are more likely to happen during your period. So you can eat foods like yogurt, kefir, kombucha, tempeh, kimchi. I have a video on probiotics, prebiotics, and things like that. You can check it out right here or in the description. Also, make sure that you're drinking plenty of water to stay hydrated because you're going to be losing lots of fluid during this time of the month. And also another thing to prevent premenstrual syndrome, so PMS, you can also eat calcium-rich foods. Studies have shown that people who ate more calcium and vitamin D had less symptoms. Herbs and spices are also great things to eat on your period. You want to be fighting inflammation all the time, obviously, but specifically on your period, you want to eat in an anti-inflammatory way. And so aside from eating lots of fruit and veggies, you can also focus on eating lots of herbs and spices, which have a lot of anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. The ones I really suggest are ginger, turmeric, black pepper, garlic, rosemary, and cinnamon, and there's tons more that you can try to add to your dishes. Are there foods you should avoid during your period? So during your period, you want to avoid triggering inflammation, so you try to reduce foods that do that. So these are mainly highly refined processed foods, maybe like deep fried foods, foods with tons of added sugar, and also red meat. And then obviously whatever food you are intolerant to. If you're intolerant to gluten or dairy, don't have that as well. As for which foods you could eat to avoid PMS, some studies suggest that coffee is to be avoided because it causes cramping and things like that, or increases cramping. But other studies have shown that this was actually not the case. So I guess it's up to you and how you feel. And side note, if you're interested on coffee, I made a video about it right here. Some recommendations I also see are to increase your protein intake, increase your fiber intake, and decrease your carb intake. But studies actually show that this has not really no effect at all. Other than that, if you want to be eating a certain type of food during your period, I would say go for it. Now's not the time to be restricting. And this brings me to my next point: how to deal with period cravings. So I get a lot of questions asking me how to deal with period cravings. And most people get these cravings the strongest. They get them towards the end of their menstrual cycle, so kind of right before their period or at the beginning of their period. It depends for people, but that is really totally normal. It's a totally normal thing to go through. Studies show that estrogen is inversely associated with leptin, and leptin is the hormone that signals fullness. And so leptin is inversely associated with the intake and the craving of carb-rich, kind of sweet foods. So when your estrogen levels are high, like it's the case towards the end of your menstrual cycle when you're experiencing PMS, and that means that your leptin levels are low, and that means that you are going to be craving more sweet foods, more like carb-rich foods, things like that. So like I was saying, I get a lot of questions from people asking me how to curb these cravings and how to get rid of them. And maybe my answer isn't satisfactory, because it's always that you shouldn't try to get rid of these cravings. You should, on the contrary, you should kind of indulge. You should honor them. It's important to understand that your body is going through this complex process, and that your hormones are changing, your mood is changing. It's dealing with all of these shifts. And so now is not the time to prevent yourself from eating the foods that you crave. I mean, I'm never for restricting, of course, but specifically not now, not during this menstrual cycle phase, where if you restrict, it could lead to, if you don't listen to your cravings, it could lead to going into this restrict then binge eating cycle, where you get frustrated because you're craving food, but you're making yourself eat something else. And so after a while, you start binging on the foods that you were craving. And so then you feel bad. So you start restricting again. And you know the cycle. We don't want that. Instead, you need to honor your body's needs, and you need to fulfill these cravings. Now, this doesn't mean that you should automatically wolf down the first pack of chips that you find because you want it, or an entire bag of cookies. It doesn't have to be like that. You can kind of eat the foods you crave mindfully, in a more mindful manner. You can enjoy the foods that you're desiring in a kind of more portioned way, and you can try to also figure out if these cravings mean anything. So for instance, if you find yourself craving lots of sweet foods, maybe it's because you're not giving your body enough whole carb sources or things like that. In short, your menstrual cycle can definitely affect the way you eat. Some foods can be useful to eat during this time, like iron-rich foods, probiotic-rich foods, omega-3 rich foods, and herbs and spices. You might also want to avoid foods that trigger inflammation, like really highly refined foods with lots of added sugar or lots of added fat. And then when it comes to cravings, it's best to honor them and to eat the foods that you crave, but this can be done in a mindful manner. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like it and subscribe, and see you on my next one. Bye.